Hey everybody, welcome back to Horse 2 Cinema, and today I have a very special video for you guys, and I'm going to be doing my favorite films of 2021, now that we're just about at the end of the year. Got a little bit of a different setting here. I'm on a little bit of a vacation here for the remainder of the year. So there are 3 films on this list. Number 3, The Woman in the Window, number 2, Thunder Force, and number 1, Tom and Jerry. That's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Nah, on a serious note, before I get into the actual list, I do want to talk about a few films that I would have considered putting on this list. I just haven't actually seen these movies yet, but I very much want to see them, and I think I probably would put them on this list, hopefully. These films are West Side Story, Nightmare Alley, Licorice Pizza, Spencer, The Tragedy of Macbeth, The Last Duel, and A Quiet Place Part 2. These films look really, really good. I just haven't, unfortunately, had the chance to see them yet. But I am going to do that as soon as possible, especially Nightmare Alley and Licorice Pizza. But with that, let's go ahead and get into the list. So there are 15 films on this list, and number 15 is going to be Encanto. This wasn't exactly a perfect Disney animation for me. It was a little bit derivative of other Disney Pixar films, but the animation was really good. The music was fun. It was very heartfelt, of course. And I actually thought the film was kind of restrained compared to other Disney films recently. I really liked the fact that there wasn't really a villain in the movie, and they just sort of have this arc for our main character, and they didn't insert some sort of like weird cartoony villain like, say, Luca did, for example, just to have some sort of villain in there when it didn't really need it. And for that reason, and of course just the animation and the music, Encanto has to make the list at number 15. Number 14 is going to be Judas and the Black Messiah. I thought the ending of this movie was a little bit preachy and a little bit overt in terms of the message that it was trying to send, but as the film went on, from about a third of the way through all the way till towards the end of the movie, I really found myself becoming more and more invested in the characters. And I really thought this sort of biblical story about somebody infiltrating, say, the Black Panthers in this case, and sort of betraying the Messiah in this case, the leader of the Black Panthers, was a really interesting story to focus on, and the characters in this film I know will stick with me for a really long time. Number 13 is going to be one of 2 documentaries on this list, and this one is going to be The Rescue by Jimmy Chin and Elizabeth Chai Vasarhelyi. These 2 directors directed one of my favorite films of all time, Free Solo, just a couple years ago, about the amazing free solo climber Alex Honnold. This guy basically scaled a giant wall in Yosemite using no ropes. And in The Rescue, Jimmy Chin and Elizabeth Chai Vasarhelyi again capture a different kind of extreme sport and utilize similar but different sort of ways of making the audience fear for the exact situation that's going on. In this case, they utilize claustrophobia because the extreme sport is cave diving. This movie covers the story of the Thai soccer team that got stuck in a cave and the weeks-long journey it took to sort of rescue them from this cave and get them back out. These 2 filmmakers really use extreme sports as a way of conveying the absolutely most visceral and scary moments that can happen in human existence, but also highlighting the limits of what humans can accomplish within these sports as well. And I thought The Rescue was almost as good as Free Solo, pretty comparable in how it was able to capture that. Number 12 on this list is going to be The Father. Now, this is a film that I pretty much never want to see again in my entire life. I really, really was depressed after watching this, but nevertheless, it's basically perfect, and that's why I have to at least put it on the list somewhere. This film is about a man who is slowly descending into dementia, but what's interesting about the film is that it's actually told from his perspective, and so there's a lot of moments where something is established, but then it's contradicted, and then it's reestablished again, and it's very confusing for the audience, and it's basically putting you in the shoes of somebody who actually has dementia. And having known people that have either dementia or Alzheimer's in my own life, I can tell you this film was extremely accurate and disturbingly accurate in how it portrayed this. And so just for that reason alone, and Anthony Hopkins' amazing performance, I had to put it on this list as well. Number 11 is going to be the second of the 2 documentaries on this list, and this is Roadrunner, a film about Anthony Bourdain, directed by Morgan Neville. Looking back on this year, I'm pretty sure this is the only film that made me cry. I'm a huge fan of Anthony Bourdain. He was a massive role model for me, kind of inspired me to want to travel a lot more, experience different cultures. And this movie was an opportunity to sort of pay tribute to him, for his greatest fans to pay tribute to him, and sort of revel in the glory that was his life, but also try and understand the reasons why he might have taken his own life back in 2018. And pondering that really, really disturbed me, and it again, it was pretty much, I think it was the only film this year that actually made me cry, so for that alone, I have to commend it. Number 10, Pig. This was a film that really caught me off guard. After I saw the trailer, I sort of was expecting a John Wick revenge-style movie here, but that's not what I got at all. Instead, I got a really heartfelt story about the way that people, especially men, deal with loss. And the characters played by Nicolas Cage and Alex Wolff really expose sort of the shadiness of the fine food industry as well. We see the length that people will go to sort of make money in this industry, and as a counter to that, the length that Nicolas Cage's character will go to try and get back his pig. So yeah, definitely not a hardcore revenge thriller, but definitely a really, really heartfelt film that I enjoyed thoroughly. Also has one of my favorite scores of the year. Number 9 on the list is going to be No Time to Die, the 5th and final Daniel Craig James Bond movie. His Daniel Craig send-off as Bond wasn't perfect at all. I think the villain Safin was a little bit underwhelming. It definitely negatively affected it at times. It was a little bit overlong as well. But nevertheless, I really think they completed James Bond's sort of saga-long, Daniel Craig era-long arc of the idea that his character doesn't want to get close to anybody, and he's really scared of trusting people. And this film, he really, really deals with the consequences of that, but then he realizes that he's really been wrong for the entire saga, and he completes his arc in a magnificent way, and I think this was one of the riskiest Bond films that's ever been made. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it also had some of the best action sequences of any Bond movie I've ever seen. Really, if you guys haven't checked this out, please, I highly recommend doing so. Number 8 is going to be a film that I've already reviewed on this channel, which is The French Dispatch, directed by Wes Anderson. Anderson's ode to journalism sort of feels like, again, his most personal film that he's ever made so far. I don't think this is his best film or anything, but I really thought that the unconventional way that in which this story is told, the way that it cuts between sort of 3 different really distinct stories, but all sort of having the same message, it really intrigued me from the first frame, like all of his films do. And with this one, more than his other films even, really, the ensemble cast really stood out with great performances by Léa Seydoux, Benicio del Toro, Jeffrey Wright, and so many others. Really check out Wes Anderson's French Dispatch if you haven't seen it yet. Number 7. I've wanted to talk about this film for a long time. Edgar Wright is one of my favorite directors working today, and Last Night in Soho was his first sort of venture into pure horror. Of course, he's done horror comedy before with the likes of Shaun of the Dead, but I really thought this film knocked it out of the park in terms of horror. I think he really understands how to both disturb an audience as well as build up an effective scare as opposed to something cheap. And I think this film really effectively explored the main character Eloise's deep dive into her nostalgia over the decade of the 1960s and the fashion and the pop culture of that era, and exposed how easily we can sort of overlook the horrifying aspects of a time period that we might be totally unfamiliar with, like Eloise is with the 60s. There's a lot of really messed up elements of that time period that she doesn't really understand until she is thrown into this world and she can't really escape it now. And the performances by Thomasin McKenzie and Anya Taylor-Joy really helped bring out the horror elements of this movie. And of course, like any good Edgar Wright movie, the soundtrack was just unforgettable. Number 6 is The Green Knight. I had a conversation with a friend about this who basically said that for her it was kind of like it wasn't the best adaptation in the world in terms of like translating it from the original, I forget if it was a poem or a book, but that she still agreed it was a good film overall. I personally really loved The Green Knight. I haven't read the original work, but just from a film perspective, I thought it was a really gorgeous looking revival of the fantasy genre. I didn't really think that in the sort of the pandemic era we would see a film kind of this scale that really captured those almost like Lord of the Rings kind of landscapes, as well as elements of discovery that we've come to expect from the genre. And I really enjoyed the way that the film deconstructed its larger themes of the notion to which, the extent to which we have free will, and also the responsibilities that are laid upon us. Also, I think this movie might have had my favorite score this year. Number 5 is going to be Mirari, which I think in some capacity came out last year, but I think in its full release was this year, so I'm counting it as this year anyway. I think a lot of the times when there's a movie about, say, immigrants, it's sort of romanticizes the sort of immigrant story and this idea that immigrants are sort of on this road to self-realization, and it's just sort of this glorious path that they're almost privileged to be on. I think Minari sort of like took those expectations and sort of flipped it on its head. It really, in a brutally honest way, tells the story of the struggle of the immigrant experience, especially in the U.S. And although this isn't really a starry-eyed portrayal of immigrants, it really does also capture the happy moments that occur in between all of the struggles that immigrants tend to face. And I thought it was extremely moving, and it was one of the films that I emotionally resonated the most with this year. Number 4 is going to be another movie that I've already reviewed on this channel, and that is Lamb. If you watch my original review for this, you know that I really love weird movies like this. And oh goddamn, this movie was so good. Just like Pig, this movie sort of deconstructs the way people deal with grief, but I think this movie does it in a much darker and more sinister way than Pig. This film uses a lot of sort of sacrificial lamb and satanic type imagery to sort of talk about the consequences of our actions that we do when we're grieving. Man, I just really want movies with more just weird ass premises like this. Just, you know, there's a couple of sheep farmers in Iceland. One of their lambs gives birth to a half human, half lamb baby. Please, just more movies like this. Sheep baby for life. Number 3 is going to be a movie that is probably the most popular one on this list, and that is Dune. I didn't really know what to expect going into Dune. I heard very mixed things, although largely positive. But I really thought Dune was a model, like a real model for how big budget filmmaking should take place nowadays. You sort of have this like big budget sort of scale with a kind of refined art house approach that Denis Villeneuve is very familiar with doing with films like Prisoners and Sicario, etc. And of course Arrival is a very similar film to Dune, and having had that experience in sci-fi already, I think he was a great choice to sort of bring this adaptation to the big screen. This movie used insanely detailed and good CGI, sort of combined with Denis Villeneuve's filmmaking aspects of putting everything in a scale that we can understand, so that we really understand the scope of this universe that he's trying to build. In terms of just the storytelling overall, I think this film was super ambitious, and maybe a little too ambitious for some people. I know a lot of people kind of consider Dune to be just like an adaptation that it has to be a TV show. You can't really translate this to a film that well. But I think Denis Villeneuve did just about as good of a job as anyone can do. Some people talk about the dangers of films' budgets being too big, and I just think that if you look at a film like Dune, I think that can really dispel a lot of the worries people have about that, because it really is a super refined, detailed film that cares about all the elements that art house films have to bring to the table, but then incorporates it to this sort of scale. Number 2 is going to be a movie that I just saw last night. I really wanted to seek this out because I heard so many great things, and that is Ttan. This is Julia Ducournau's second body horror film. I think it's her second film generally. This is easily the most disturbing film I saw this year. This film is essentially about a woman who, when she was a little girl, got into a car accident and a titanium plate had to be inserted into her head. And since then, she's sort of due to the lack of a relationship with her father, has developed sort of a serial killer personality, and she has sex with a car and becomes pregnant. Yeah, that was made this year. I thought Lamb would be the weirdest movie I saw this year. But what really struck me about this, I knew it was going to be disturbing, but what really struck me about it was just how heartfelt it was in some ways. This really is kind of just a redemption story for this character who has been through a lot in her life and has done a lot of bad things herself. But as soon as she meets this character, Vincent, it really kind of gives new meaning to her life as well as Vincent's. And their interaction with one another has some of the most subtext and some of the most depth that I've seen of any screen combo in the entire year, and maybe even in the last few years. Also, there's just great music and dance sequences in this movie. There's one in particular between Vincent and our main character Alexia that to me, it kind of rivaled Pulp Fiction. That's how good it was. So even if you're a little adverse to the body horror genre, I mean, this is a very intense film for sure, but I would definitely recommend checking this out if you're in for just a really heartfelt, deep story. My number 1 film of the year is actually a movie that I have reviewed, and it's a movie I gave, I think, an A- to. I think I would upgrade that because I think the reason why I gave The Power of the Dog an A- at first was because I sort of thought it was a little bit inaccessible for some audiences. But then I sort of realized that for me, and just how I view it, it doesn't really matter that much. I personally found it super intriguing, and it was a film that I can see myself revisiting a lot. I thought the way that this movie sort of deconstructed toxic masculinity, it could have come off as very preachy, very just anti the traditional men or whatever, and it could have really been off-putting for a lot of people, myself included. But the way the film ended and the way that it sort of built up these really sinister twists and plot developments that are hidden under the surface, and then they really elevate themselves in the last minutes of the movie, that really resonated with me, and it was a big surprise. The relationship between Benedict Cumberbatch and Cody Smith-McPhee's character, there's just so much subtext and depth there. And when you lump in Kirsten Dunst's characters into the mix, it's sort of fascinating to see just the way that the coexistence alone of these three people sort of drives these characters much deeper into despair. Again, I thought the ending was just absolutely brilliant. It was a perfect twist, I think. Going back and watching the film again, you could really see a lot of the details that sort of hinted at where they were going to go with it. And I just think this was brilliant, and Jane Campion did a fantastic job with this. I would definitely upgrade my grade from probably an A- to either an A or an A+. And yeah, The Power of the Dog is my favorite film of 2021. So yeah, these are my 15 favorite movies of the year. I really wish I could add a lot more to this list. I just kind of wanted to give my thoughts on these 15. And of course, there's all those, I think, 7 or 8 films or something that I haven't gotten to see yet. I'm really excited for Licorice Pizza and Nightmare Alley in particular. I'm definitely going to go see those really soon. So yeah, let me know in the comments, what are some of your favorite films this year? Let me know on the comments down here or on my Instagram. Be sure to subscribe down below, and I will see you guys in the next video.